personally, I thought it would be worthwhile for each of you to take us quite briefly through what your business does and where you sit within this space, and I suppose whether or not you see yourselves as market disruptors, but please try and keep the marketing to a low extent since we're all a bit hungover for that.
Look, WealthTrack's a platform. I've known my fellow competitors for some time. I understand the market quite well in the platform space, but probably what's unique about our business is that we're really a distribution company of quality platform administration for IFAs. So we're very much focused on IFAs. We don't fall under the constraints of capital issues in terms of our admin service because we outsource that to various providers. So we're really just a pure distribution company. Most of our IFAs are pretty much as per investment trends. They're 45 million in FUM, 150 odd clients. That's our typical type of client, and they're spread all over the country, mainly limited to the eastern seaboard. And we've got a very good relationship with all of those. I suppose that sometimes I become a practice development manager with them in their practices, help them with current issues in terms of what's happening with FOFA. You'll probably touch on the Murray report later. So there's always changes, also licking the wounds after a GFC. The wounds are still there. So it's very a close relationship we have with the dealers who are also advisors. The dealers, one-man bands, they are the only advisor, and they typically have 3 or 4 support staff. They use Xplan or Coin or Midwinter. So they're pretty much a normal style of planner, but they've just got their own license. They never complain about having their own license. They like the freedom and the flexibility that comes with that. We're naked pricing in terms of all of our products, and what you see is what you get in terms of our functionality and pricing structure.
We operate in very much the same space as Matt Johnson, so we are primarily operating in the IFA space and private client space. I guess the key difference really is that, that we're the manufacturer of the actual platform. So we've been in existence for about 12 years, where we started off. When I started, there was about 5 of us, and we've been developing the product ever since. Because we operate in the IFA market, we don't have the benefit of distribution, clearly, that the banks do. So we have to work very hard for every dollar. And to use a cliche, it's an innovate or die. It'd be nice to actually walk into an office and for an advisor to buy our product off the shelf. But every single practice that we tend to walk into wants something different. So we're constantly developing and looking at new ways to, I guess, enhance the advisor businesses, but also our client experience. In addition to platform, we have recently, I guess, bolstered up our advice business. So we operate a group called Netwealth Advice, and through that we have salaried financial planning, licensee services, and again, we're there to provide the backbone or the support structures for the IFA market.
So Calistone is a transaction network, established 6 years ago in the UK, but 2.5 years ago in Australia. So what we're doing is connecting people or buyers and sellers of managed funds, so unlisted assets. We've grown to currently 10 billion of assets has gone through the Australian network since inception, and that's obviously growing. We've got about 70% coverage of the platform space, either through direct or custodial market, and about 83 fund managers have contracted to the network so far, and growing there. I'd say in terms of a question though, are we a disruptive technology? I think when people look at something like Calistone, we are just replacing a fax at the moment or a piece of paper, which you'd think is archaic in this day and age, but it's in everyone's back offices still today. So yes, we're disruptive if you say we remove a fax. Where I'd say is more disruptive from our experience in the UK and other markets, which we're in 18 across the globe, is how you use that automation to enhance your product. And I'm looking at Recep again. So, for example, a lot of clients look at the problem to be fixed, so remove the fax, efficiency, remove risk. But overseas, as automation grows, and I think some of our early adopters like Macquarie and BT and Netwealth as well, start seeing that automation as starting to become more of a product enhancement opportunity, and that's where the evolution is starting now that we've been here 2.5 years. So I can give you examples of that later, but I think I'll hand it over here.
Excellent, thanks. Well, I think we are a disruptor. Our business is allowing financial planners to crowdfund and buy direct property. in a regulated structure. So it's brand new, and the market we're really disrupting is the old-fashioned buy a whole property or try to leverage within an SMSF. The real business imperative behind Domicom is to enable financial planners to solve the asset allocation problem for direct property in a way that simulates the investment of direct property. So obviously I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other drivers in terms of FOFA and the Murray report at the appropriate time. But yeah.
Sure. So I do really want to get to the Murray report and also recap some of the discussion we had yesterday in terms of the changing landscape of customer base and distribution, I guess from the perspective of you guys. But firstly, I want to go to Kim Williams's point of disintermediation. So this idea that the middle market may be dissipating in a number of industries, financial services perhaps being a little bit late to that, and the rise of a more informed, more powerful consumer. How do you guys see that playing out?
I'll probably talk about self-managed super funds in that area. Actually, they're a third of the industry, as we know. Just over $500 billion, and we've seen a thirst, if you like, for self-managed super funds. So we launched a product last year, and it's been very well received. That was designed, not that we had to get into it, it was actually designed as an enabler. Advisors were coming to me and saying, Matt, we need a product in this area, because they're getting clients that are wanting to be in self-managed super funds. Now, we all know that the entry level to self-managed super funds used to be around about the half a bar. That's come down now. It's probably around about 200K, 250K. And for someone in their 40s, a husband and wife, that's not unrealistic to have that kind of money in superannuation. So they're DIY, they're self-directed, they're wanting to get involved in self-managed super funds. So we've come to the party in relation to that. And so we launched our product in April, then we launched an interactive app for that product back in October. So there's over 2,000 apps out there now under WealthTrack Self-Managed. We've got a couple of hundred clients there now that are really embracing that technology. So we got into it by not probably reactive rather than proactive, to be fair, but we're in that and we're happy to be in that, and we'll be in that for some time. So that's just an example of what we've been discussing.
I think it's a fascinating topic, and I've just done a recent roadshow, I guess, on the main threats that I see in the financial services industry over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. I think we're all bored of FOFA, so there's no point talking about that, but there's still a lot of regulation that's going to come through, that's going to change, and it's going to keep changing. So we just need to deal that and put it to one side. Second big challenge for, I think, financial advisors and also platforms is just this huge, I guess, generational shift or wealth transfer that is actually going to occur over the next 5 to 10 years. So traditional models which are looking at retirees and ignoring, I guess, the Gen X's and Gen Y's that we've talked about for so long are going to miss out in 5 years, because those are going to be our new clients, and they expect to do things differently. So there's a national or an international research house called Forrester who talks about this as the age of the consumer or the age of the customer. And this is really about the customer being more empowered, as Kim talked about. And these customers, they want access to their information. They want to, they'll deal with you anytime, anywhere, and how they choose. So whether it's via social, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's just them logging online and actually looking, at their financial balance. So as companies, we need to recognise that this is actually coming, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to upset some of the traditional distribution channels, but we need to be able to accommodate it in the future, I think.
I'd look to our UK experience just as a comparative model. So post-RDR, there was a flight to direct-to-consumer in the UK. And what you see from that is quite interesting. So Hargreaves, for example, as a company, took a huge amount of the flow off the traditional platforms in that space in the last 18 months. And they're an interesting model in that they're a complete one-stop shop. So they've got a direct-to-consumer execution, they've got brokerage, they've got funds management, as well as advice and wealth. They really have succeeded mostly on their direct-to-consumer offering. Nutmeg came in with more of a model portfolio structure and managed account structure, sorry, and that's been very successful. Mostly, if you looked at Recep's really interesting last slide that he couldn't convert to Aussie dollars, it's because advice is costly in the UK. So that whole Gen X is looking to utilise more of an online managed account structure there, and that's done on risk profile, no advice at all. It's just based on your age and your risk appetite and your amount of money. So in response to those two, the traditional platforms now have got this new discussion. It's called B2B2C, you know, the new term. Basically, what they're trying to do is give access of their traditional platforms to the consumer with, they call it guided advice. So it's not restricted. It's guided advice, but provide execution tools for that same direct consumer. So they're taking from where they were, trying to compete with these new influencers. And I think that's an interesting analogy as to whether anything like that will happen more in this market.
Yeah, look, I think obviously the flight to SMSF is well documented. We had 18,000 SMSFs on my platform when I left in Praemium 3 years ago. So yeah, that's really I see the main driver for a lot of the disintermediation that's occurring in terms of you know, maybe risk to platforms, because a lot of the SMSFs don't appear to be using platforms. Now the other thing, the comment about you know, in terms of you know, what the minimum for an SMSF is, you know, clearly in the press, you know, as you said, it started at half a bar, you know, 500 grand. It's gone down to maybe 100 or 200 grand. I think you'll see it now. It's about 40 grand. We've got a couple of our clients who are deploying an SMSF. As long as you stay in the cash pool and property sub funds, you can have an SMSF for 40 grand. In other words, it's 1%, $450. This is an example of innovation. You don't need governments to regulate minimums. Let the market decide and let the efficiencies, and that's what's causing these minimums, the efficiency of the process, the fact there's pass-through audit certificates with GS 007, there's automatic pass-through of all the transactions, and they're all fully attributable and audited. So there's a lot going on, and the disintermediation, I think, also flows not just, you know, at the moment financial planners are looking at the current you know, advice process. It's going to extend now to include the equity release from the baby boomers who are retiring, provide advice models for the current you know, 40 to 50-year-olds, and then you need a product for the Gen X, Gen Ys, and you need to do it all at the same time, because all of a sudden now you have intergenerational, you know, wealth planning, and that's, I think, the next thing that's coming, and you know, and everyone's going to have to go there.
I think this disintermediation discussion is becoming more prominent in financial services, although perhaps we're not using that term. We do talk about robo-advice, and really that discussion of the consumer-facing or sort of automated advice. The discussion tends to be very focused on what this means for advice providers. What does this mean for dealer groups? What does this mean for individual planners? What I'm interested in is, what does this mean for funds management? So let's say there is this disintermediation, the middle market does start to dissipate. How should fund managers and funds management businesses be preparing for that? Should they be starting now to develop stronger relationships with the consumer, stronger consumer brands, or should they be really backing the intermediary channels to grow?
Isn't the robo advice really an automated advisor? So from a financial you know, fund management perspective, distribution is king, and so if that's the new distribution angle, you need to get relationships with the robo advisor.
As an advice industry, we need to look at how we evolve the advice model, because I think there's a real place for advisors in the future. It's just about for the type of advice that we provide and how we provide it. And to use sort of an old analogy, I have a personal trainer twice a week. And the reason I have a personal trainer twice a week is because I need accountability. I need someone to wake me up at 7:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and to make me do those extra, you know, push-ups, etc. And it's about it's about accountability, coaching, and taking, you know, a vast amount of information and distilling it to someone that might not be as financially literate as some of us in the room. So it's just about evolving the model, and I think that the direct or intermediated part of the market will grow, and it will threaten those that don't change their business model.
I don't think at the cost of actual clients that rely on advice. So we're talking about all growing together in a real aspect. We're at WealthTrack, we're actually pro-advice. We always believe that someone will be better off having quality advice than not engaging advice at all. So we haven't gone directly to the consumer, although our reporting mechanisms and our apps that we're launching one for our app solution right now in the next couple of months. They're all consumer based. So that's just so the consumer can have greater look through, greater process, see their account balances. They won't be able to trade on a app. They'll be able to do whatever they want on their self-managed super fund because they're the trustee. But we see just creating more and more tools for the advisor, because that market is growing also. So as I said, we're very pro-advice. I still think advisors still need to work on their CVPs. They're still struggling with that, and they need to see that greater value on the advice that they give and be able to sell that advice. But I look, two areas will grow. There's $1.7 trillion in the industry just in super alone, and that's growing at an alarming rate in a good way.
So just one quick thing. I think this robo-advice isn't a threat to the full advice side. I think the robo-advisor is for the 80% that aren't being advised at all. So, don't look at it as a threat to the current advice business, and it'll be a triage thing. So it'll provide basic advice for those, and then as they needs a scale, the robo-advisor would direct to the real advisor. So the robo-advice will be part of a full advice service.
And I think just to pick up on what Shannon was saying, was it B2B to C? A lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is around that customer interaction. I think someone called it the digital front door yesterday. So how do we actually spend the money to give advisors the tool that they need to engage thoroughly with their clients? So giving them really sexy interfaces and presenting information to their clients in a much more interesting way, so that we actually sit there and support the the advisor value proposition to the end client.
So I think the underlying point that all of you are making there is that intermediary distribution at various levels is still extremely core to all of your businesses, and certainly to our business and to where we see media going. In contrast, I suppose, to what Kim Williams was saying. So to get into that then, and I guess where you guys see the distribution going, let's adopt some kind of not improbable but slightly wild hypotheticals. John Hewson yesterday spoke about the, slightly alarmist, but spoke about the banks possibly divesting from wealth management completely, but let's start with divesting from advice. So let's say that happens, or let's say that the Murray inquiry recommends a structural separation of product and advice and actually forces them out of the picture, and the government then acts on that, which is not improbable, or at least not impossible. So one of the really interesting things I think that came out of the Big End of Town panel yesterday was the passionate sort of defence of strategy from all four of the panellists about their distribution to the IFA market, and all of them sort of said the same thing there. Does that worry you as businesses? Certainly three of your businesses are very clearly targeted, but the implication, the subtext of what the Big End of Town has said there is that even if our aligned networks dissipate, even if our distribution goes away, we can still have that core IFA market. So it seems that all of you are kind of looking at this 20% now. How do you see that?
Well, they've all gone, haven't they? Have they all left for today? Look, when I'm out there pounding the pavement, and my role is probably 70% still sales, so I'm working with advisors and dealers quite closely. And look, I'm bumping into Matt's team, and I'm bumping into Hub24 people, and occasionally OneView, who are all in that swimming in the same pond, if you like. But I'll never come across a bank BDM pushing products to IFA. So I don't know where they are, but they're not in the IFA market. And I can say that, as I said, because they're gone now. In terms of the Murray report, it was actually a recommendation, a preliminary recommendation, that they may have to divest of wealth. I can't see that ever happening. Because they're also loving the term deposits, and the term deposits will back up their balance sheets. And so all the panellists here yesterday spoke about offering a huge range of term deposits. They're all in their own names, but they just had varying maturities. So at the end of the day, the range was there, but just the different brands weren't. So they need those term deposits for their balance sheets, and that'll help them with their Basel requirements. So there's no way in the foreseeable future they'll divest out of product. They might start to taper down on advice, and that's what you're alluding to in your opening question. But look, bring it on, I say. It's a nice pond that we're in, and I think there's enough good quality players in there. But let them try and have a crack. I'll welcome the opportunity.
As I was lamenting on the comments from the Big End of Town yesterday, the safety of my hotel room, I was thinking through, I guess, some of the items that they suggested were their competitive advantage. And the more I thought about it, I think the only real competitive advantage that the banks have at the moment in the platform space is distribution and their brand. And the reality is, I think that both of those are potentially under severe threat at the moment. So if you look at distribution, every day we're getting inquiries about people coming from the institutions wanting to set up their own AFSL or to join a non-aligned group. And a large part of that is actually because of brand. So, their brand is getting smashed in the press and they don't want to be associated with those brands anymore. So there's a big shift at the moment. And we've been, watching the split between IFA and institution very closely for the last many years, because at the end of the day, that 20% that it has been historically is the pond that we can play in. And it was getting smaller, and it was looking at about, 90-10 at one stage. And I think it could shift very quickly back the other way. It might be 50-50 over the next couple of years. It's going to be really interesting to see where it lands. As far as balance sheet, I think if you ask anyone how much they earn, it's typically 20% less than they spend. If you've got a big pot of money, you're going to spend a big pot of money, and I think you can achieve a lot without a big balance sheet. And some of the other things that they mentioned are just access to talent within an employee pool. There's a lot of very smart people out there, and as Kim said, there's no monopoly on wisdom these days. So they've really got to focus on those two advantages, which may or may not give them an advantage in the future.
I just make a more generic comment. I mean, we're talking about a regulatory enforcement that then causes change, which is very reactive. If you look at the self-managed super fund space, everything's unbundled. So, they choose their own research, they choose their own execution, etc. Which, if you look at the big banks, it's all in one. So if they're forced to change, it may be an opportunity to look at specialisation and where they add value or whether they gain profit, rather than feeling that they have to be what they were yesterday.
I really don't think any of the guys here have anything to worry about in the near term from the big five or whatever coming in to compete against the IFAs, because the experience I've had is that they do operate by committee. And the cycle of innovation within a big five is, my grandchildren will be using some of the features, not quite that long, but it's that they're so focused on risk. We came close to doing a deal with one of the big five, and I think there was a committee of 10, and I think two said no, so that was it. So I think for the foreseeable future, innovation happens much quicker with companies like ours than in the big five, no matter what they think.
So they should be worried, essentially, is what you're saying?
Oh, not necessarily. From my view, they're not a competitor to me because they're a potential distribution channel for me. So, I like them. But for these guys, yes, I think, because you can see the runs that I've got on the board, and, like Netwealth, you've grown fantastically, and your product range. But also, this thing about big banks are the only people who have skilled people is rubbish. We all worked in big banks or big organisations, and I can tell you, I didn't have a lobotomy when I left, and I'm sure that's true for everyone.
We're all operating within this 20%. That's the space where we can be. But if you look at all of the submissions of the large banks and the large institutions to the Murray inquiry, they've all said the same thing, and the message is vertical integration is not bad. In fact, vertical integration is good because it allows you to have greater resources to service the community and so on. But more specifically, they have sought to dispel this myth of product bias. But if you guys, as business people who are following this closely, seriously believe that the 20% is where you operate, and I think that could be true, does that mean that this product bias thing is very real?
Of course it is. Like now, technically, there's huge APLs, but their business process supports their own internal products. I think the proof in the pudding is to see in any given organisation what the actual sales are, what the actual flows of sales are, and you say, why is that so? If it's an open, APL. Yeah. I've
asked for them, mate. They haven't released them to me. So.
Okay.
I'd have to say, though, we keep focusing back to the narrow end of discussions. Vertical integration, whether you believe it's bad or good, you've got to ask, well, is there value being given to the client, and is that demonstrated? Because if you can find a cheaper product internally that gives you the same performance as one outside of the bank, then they do have an argument to use that product. So it's not the flows that go there, is it delivering the value to the end client, and at what cost? So I think that debate's still going to go for quite a long time.
So let's broaden the discussion. And the other really interesting thing that I think that the Big Four said was there was particularly Craig from BT made the point that there are far more advantages to scale than disadvantages. How would you guys say that? How do you compete with that?
there's definitely a lot of advantages to scale, and everyone is trying to build scale. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the name of the game. But there's also a lot of disadvantages, and we're fortunate that we came into the market a little bit later. So unlike BT, I think Public and saying they've got something like 500 systems that they have to integrate. We've got one core admin system, and we control the display layers and all those sort of things. So for us to get a product to market is far easier and far quicker than one of the big four, I'd suggest. With scale, you do get certain benefits, but I just don't think they're as great as one would think.
I'll just quickly on the previous topic for a sec first, is that we're targeting the other 82. It's not just the 20. The 20 is our core market that will go with us in the first year. They're the independent thinkers that will make these decisions. However, the other 80 are also thinking about their future and where they want to live. And I assume you're also presenting to advisors that are in the verticals, not just advisors that are in the independents. So we're doing that all the time. But in terms of just lost my train of thought. What was the last question?
So scale.
Scale. Yeah, I think that the question of scale, all businesses are trying to achieve scale. So we're trying to achieve scale as well. So it's not really something that we're not aiming for, but the fact that we're young and small, just like Matt here, is that we're very, very nimble. We can bring products to market, and also innovative products without 3 years worth of market research and everything else. Now we put our money on the line and capital on the line to do so. We all do, but they're risks that we're willing to take that I think the big platforms really aren't structured to do so. So that's our advantage. Their advantage is they have a lot of money.
I'd add to scale that cloud technologies basically changed the whole level playing ground here in Australia in the last 2 years, especially since ASIC approved a few providers and so forth. Because cloud technology, basically, in my layman's terms of understanding it, is instead of football fields of servers to cope with that one peak day to make sure that everyone's happy with ASIC, you get to pay as you go, and that makes it a lot less overhead. So anyone can get in, and then that means that those that can adopt those types of technologies and automation, which obviously is the plug for us in the middle there, means that you don't have to have, from a technology or infrastructure perspective, the expenditure of the past. And as a result, you can add value in terms of expenditure where it counts, rather than where in the legacy days you needed to have a bank balance of the size of the Big Five to be able to enter that space.
Can I just add to that? We were fortunate to meet Calistone probably 3 years ago now, I guess. Yeah. And they've been absolutely fantastic for our business. And because it was I don't know how many people you would have met with initially, it might have been 2 or 3 people that met. We looked at it, we said, what a great idea. And we were happy to pilot a lot of the programs that they put to us. And it's been a huge benefit within our business, whereas there's a number of the larger platforms that I think are still sort of sitting there scratching their head saying, is this a good idea? Is it going to happen? And that's a benefit of, I guess, smaller scale.
So Dr. Hewson's comments weren't only about advice, though, and certainly he made some comments about this divestment here, but I interviewed him before the session, and he went even further, and he clearly had made the point to me that the banks have gone into wealth management, they spent too much, they stuffed it up essentially, and they're going to get out. That is what he was saying during a train of thought that went kind of off into the ether. But the question is, we talk about dealer group level and this sort of dichotomy that's happening, perhaps a rise of the independents. At funds management level, are we seeing a similar thing? Is it an easier environment now for a boutique fund manager to thrive and to prosper than it was previously?
Tremendously so. I know your comment about let's move on from FOFA. I can tell you FOFA is singularly the best thing for a new fund manager. There is no issue now of what commission am I going to give some new guys. There is no issue of I'm a really small little fund that a big fund there can incent the dealer group by some soft dollar, hard dollar, brown envelope, kickback, whatever, to not use me. So right now that financial level playing field is there, and the other one is client best interest test. Isn't that fantastic? All we've got to do as a new incumbent is create a good product that meets a need, that does it better than the other guy, and then they should use us. You can't ask for a better playing field for a startup. So I think it's fantastic.
So the additional regulatory burdens, they have been mitigated by the benefits?
Very much so. Yeah, we've gone as you know, we spent years with ASIC to get our product approved, very special reliefs and everything else because it's never been done before, etc. Whilst in the middle of it, if you ask me, I was very frustrated. Now, having gone through it, we've got a much better product because of the regulatory structure. But we've also, we've invested millions, and in the comfort that it's a level playing field. We can't have a huge big fund manager come in and just squash us because they've got the financial resources to corrupt the process.
So, and to the rest of you, so this idea of regulation, a regulatory culture, a committee culture, strangling a culture of innovation in Australia, you're not saying where do you see that?
Oh, there's some really interesting new structures coming out. You mentioned managed funds before. Obviously, MFund is now here, and it's going to be fascinating to watch how that goes. And it's obviously around getting that direct access to the SMSF investor. And there's a huge surge as well in LIC. So almost every day now we're seeing a new LIC list from a big manager. So Perpetual announced that they're launching their LIC. And I thought, what a fantastic way to get a lot of money into a fund really, really quickly. You basically announce it. It goes to IPO, you raise a couple of $100 million in 3 weeks, and then you sit on the fund for foreseeable future. And we're going to see more and more of those style of investments coming out, particularly because you don't have to pay shelf space, you don't have to pay dealer groups, it's on the market. And managed accounts, we might run out of time, but that's going to be another fantastic structure that I don't think is going to cripple the managed fund industry, but it's just something else that's going to support investors.
I'd be interested to see what the rest of you think on that managed fund thing and also SMSFs.
Yeah, I agree exactly what what Matt just said. He actually stole my thunder. I think LIC's a really a positive, I suppose, mechanism to get advice or to get the consumer into the market, direct equities. And I think the early adopters will be the 20%. They'll be the IFAs because they haven't got that committee style requirement. IML, launched and picked up their LIC with 185 million closed-ended product, 99 basis points. Yeah, very well supported. Perpetual's come out this morning with the same thing, and I think LICs, ETFs, and managed accounts, they can almost be the gateway for IFAs in terms of wanting to get into direct shares, but not having that know-how or that capability, or not wanting to have that know-how. Some are actually divesting themselves of being investment managers, leave it to the professionals, but their clients are asking for direct capabilities. So these new style products, and now with FOFA in place, it's made it easy for those entrants to get in and for those things to happen. And I think, I'm very positive about the future and also about FOFA because the fundamental reason of FOFA, or the principle behind FOFA, is separating product from advice. And for the last 30 years, people have thought that advice was free because it's all embedded into the product. Now they know there's a separation between product and advice, and it's up to the advisor. A very good advisor should be able to sell his advice capabilities through CVP, and the product guys just stick to manufacturing products and doing it for a reasonable price.
Well, I'd add though that if you look at the self-managed super funds area, there's a huge opportunity for some of the managed fund managers, managed funds, in that diversification is still a real problem within that asset structure. I appreciate cash and property, and maybe some people have two supers, one for that purpose and one for the rest of the diversification. But to try and get a true stock picker that actually knows more about stock picking than yourself, or an international exposure, is actually quite difficult without being really intelligent doing that all your time. And I don't think that all the advisors are good stock pickers. So not trying to offend anyone that thinks the world of advisors, but in those areas, the managed funds has a true need. It's just getting that to the education level as well as the opportunity for those investors.
I sort of disagree with a little bit of what's been said in terms of the attractiveness of LICs and funds and whatever for SMSF in particular. I've obviously my premium time with 18,000 SMSFs. One of the things that and dealing with a lot of advisors for SMSFs is that I think people are ignoring something. 1 million Australians are telling you something by their actions. Forget about what we think. Forget about whether we believe that they should do this or that. They should professional fund managers. The reality is that they go to the effort of getting trust deeds, paying fees, filling out all those stupid forms to get out of corporate or industry fund, which is akin to changing bank accounts. It's a real pain. Then they move their money into industry, into an SMSF. If they wanted a pooled investment vehicle as their, operandus manda, whatever it is, they would have stayed where they were. Okay, if they wanted a pooled investment, they would have stayed in corporate super, they would have stayed in industry funds. So I think SMSFs are a very big opportunity for managed accounts because a managed account, all that is an SMA, all it is a segregated managed fund. They're still managed funds, but the difference is that you get this engagement with the investments rather than having one asset. So, in terms of yesterday, one of the comments yesterday that 10 years ago the SMA presenters, and that was I was one of them, saying SMAs are going to take over the world, and I still think they will. And the only thing I didn't account for was 5 years of GFC, and during the GFC, there are no flows into equities, and SMAs are equities. So I think the next 5 years you'll see SMAs or managed accounts or UMAs or whatever name you want to call them will become the driving force. So yeah.
So I think that flows nicely to a final question to each of you, both for this panel session, but also for the conference. Wraps and platforms as we know them, is the future bright, or will Peter Johnston have the last word?
Look, they're definitely here to stay. I know Peter quite well, and I was taken back by his comments, but he said those for a reason. Look, they're here to stay, and as long as we continue to innovate and grow, both in our ideas and also listen to our consumers through the eyes of our intermediaries, being advisors or accountants. I think they're here to stay. We've already had a bit of price pressure on wraps. The last few wrap conferences I've been coming to, everyone's talking about doing it for free and almost a race to the bottom in terms of pricing. I think we're almost there in terms of pricing. Advisors have had to cough up in terms of their advice pricing model. They've had to be really naked now about that and show exactly what they're charging and not be reliant on rebates. I think the third piece of the wheel now is fund managers, and they're still pricing, as if they were managing half the amount of money that they're managing. So they're all still running around their 90 basis points, 80 basis points, and quite frankly, I still think that's too expensive. The Murray report touched on that, the actual price for superannuation, but back off on the platform pricing. Leave the advisors alone, and let's start looking at fund manager pricing.
Yeah, I totally agree with Matt. Apart from the fund manager bit. Pricing pressure is probably the biggest single threat to the industry. We can't just keep dropping prices to gain market share. It's a silly game, and eventually we're all going to lose. So as long as pricing can be maintained at a reasonable level, I think platforms have got a pretty rosy future, to be honest. I like to think we do a lot. We're continuing to do a lot, and products are continually evolving. So in 5 years, we'll be sitting here, and our product range will look very, very different to what it does today. But platforms are difficult to run. There's a lot that actually goes on to run a platform, and I think that they'll continue to be here.
I'd echo that, and it's those that invest in change and scale and look at what the client wants, not what they want to sell to the client. I think those will survive very well.
What is a wrap? A wrap is a administration layer with or technology with a legal structure, and so you're asking, will there be a continuing need for an administration technology with a legal structure? Of course there will, but what will it look like? It'll change. I think it'll clearly all go cloud. Like all our stuff is cloud, and I echo what you said. The cloud, we're all in Azure. What it cost me in premium to do this, it's costing me nothing now. So it's fantastic. So the new versions of wraps and the current ones need to reinvent themselves technologically, because at some point someone's going to use one of the new cloud services to really leapfrog them, but they'll still be wraps. They'll still have a custody element, and they'll still be doing it. They'll just do it using much better technology.